Now, if you've seen Nested Knowledge's full course on how to do a review from start to finish, you'll recall that the key to a successful systematic review is having a medical research question that can be framed in terms of the population treated, the interventions or comparators used to treat them, and then the outcomes that we can use to judge the efficacy of those therapies. And you'll also recall that I've previously published a lot on stroke, so I will be using basilar artery stroke as my search example for this. And brief medical background, acute ischemic strokes are blood clots in the brain, and basilar artery is a very specific, extremely harmful location for a stroke to happen because it's the artery that feeds your brainstem. So if you have an acute ischemic stroke or blood clot in your basilar artery, it can be extremely harmful. And the two main treatments for this are an endovascular therapy called thrombectomy and a medical therapy called thrombolysis, or a clot-busting drug. With that background out of the way, let's jump into how we would start building a search on basilar artery stroke within Autolit. So we go to Autolit homepage, and I actually already have a nest started for this. And let's craft our search in the protocol, which is something you should do with your collaborators anyway. So we go to Settings, go to Protocol Editor, and you can see I already have framed our research question in terms of P, I, and O. So in patients with acute ischemic stroke of the basilar artery, how does thrombectomy compare to thrombolysis with respect to their neurological outcomes? And you can see that I've also added the specific scale used by physicians to measure neurological outcome. So how would we craft a starter search for this? Well, the first thing we want to do is simply reflect our P of interest. So we can just say acute ischemic stroke. And we actually want to narrow in on basilar artery stroke, so we can and together, which is narrowing, and basilar artery. So I can just put in basilar, and this should return me all articles that have the phrase acute ischemic stroke and the term basilar within them. Then we also need to and it together with our interventions of interest. So we add thrombectomy or thrombolysis. And we also want to search for our outcomes of interest. So for this, I can put in neurological outcome as a phrase. And I can put in the synonyms for it. So modified Rankin scale. And any acronyms thereof. So for this, there's actually an acronym of MRS. And so we put all this together, and this is not necessarily going to be my final search strategy, but I find that especially in the nested knowledge paradigm, it's generally best to put in a search that's going to bring back not too many records, so usually under 200, that will allow me to then screen 20 or 30 of them and actually figure out if I'm on the right track. Because the goal of a good search is to maximize the number of includable records that we find while minimizing the extra work of excluding anything that's extraneous. So a good way to start is to just put together my P, I, and O, and then run that search on PubMed to see whether it can be a good starter search, as in a search that's small enough that I can start examining whether or not it's bringing back records of interest. So we just take that query, we go to the literature search page, we add it. We have identified PubMed as our database of interest, but we could put it into another one. I'm not going to schedule this for right now, but note that this is going to bring back 101 articles, which is perfect for our purposes of doing starter screening to see whether the candidate articles are in fact of interest, in which case we can build out more synonyms of our P, I, and O of interest, or whether we're bringing back a lot of unnecessary articles, in which case we can start appending extra modifiers, such as searching only within certain study types, only within certain dates, or excluding given phrases within those articles. So, in review, if you're struggling to craft a search, the best thing to do is go straight back to your research question, build out your P, your I, and your O, append them together using a Boolean query, run that, and then start screening the underlying records of interest that might be relevant to your research question. And then only after getting some of that starter information back from those candidate articles, do you then go back and build out your query to make sure you're being both comprehensive and as narrow as possible on records of interest. Thanks so much.